In key issue 1, we were describing what development looked like. Here in key issue 2, we're looking at inequality. And when we're looking at inequality, we're using that basic human development index. And remember that it's looking at 3 basic things. It's a decent standard of living, it's do I have some access to education, and do I have access to health. And so all this inequality adjusted HDI is doing is making some manipulations so that you can compare the inequality from one place to another. So when we look at, all right, hold on, let me get to the next. When we look at the world map here, we can see that Canada, Western Europe, and Australia are very equal in terms of how genders are treated. And we can see that Canada does better than the United States. And we can also see that a large portion of South America and a large portion of Sub-Saharan Africa, as well as South Asia, Pakistan and Afghanistan, are also very low on their equality index. In the Rights to Riches assignment, you saw women collecting water and firewood because it's considered to be a woman's job in much of Asia. And women are not treated equally around the world. Women get less training and less education from the United Nations than men do. They receive about half of what a man gets in a will. Their testimony in a court of law is equal to about a half of a man. And so women are subordinated, particularly in Asia. And that's what we're talking about in this chapter, is the level of inequality that we're dealing with. So here we have a map of Turkey, and let me repeat some things I said in an earlier video. First, we want to remember that Turkey is important because of its relative location. So here in Istanbul, on the right-hand side is Asia, and on the left-hand side is Europe. So it's in a very unique spot. It's in between those 2 continents and those 2 major societies. Also remember, getting in here, you're coming through the Dardanelles, and then coming in through the Bosphorus Straits, and then here you come into the Black Sea. And that's very important to Russia, because Russia, you know, they just invaded Crimea, annexed Crimea, and that's where their navy was. So with one cannon, you could stop the whole Russian navy from entering the Mediterranean Sea. So Istanbul and Turkey has a great relative location. And here you see over in the eastern part of the country the Kurdish realm, and there's bad feelings. They've had a on and off civil war for 20 years. So look at what neighborhood you're in. There is a Kurdish element in the northeastern part of Syria, in the northern part of Iraq, in the northwestern part of Iran, and the southeastern part of Turkey. So this whole area in here would like to be known as Kurdistan. And they are in a similar situation with the Palestinians, is that they want sovereignty. They want a homeland. They have the people and they have the culture. And remember, they're not Arabs, they're Kurds. And so they would like to have some land to call their own. And Turkey over here is, and their president, their prime minister, Erdogan, is adamantly against that. And so that just shows that you can have inequality between countries, but you can also have inequalities inside of a country. And I forgot to mention that Turkey, it was the first and only NATO country, Muslim country, to be in NATO. And so it plays an oversized role in NATO deliberations. Here is a graph showing the inequality between the United States and the United Kingdom. And for both countries, you can see that we got more equal up until about 1975, 1980, and then things started getting more unequal. And you can see that the United Kingdom is more equal than we are. And when you look at the level of inequality in the United States and you compare it with other industrial countries, what you would find is that we would have one of the most unequal. In other words, we have there's a big gap between the rich and the poor, and that would be characteristic of us and not so much characteristic of Europe. In this map, we're looking at gender inequality, And remember that what we're measuring the gender gap in the level of achievement in health, education, and standard of living. And what do we see on this map? We see that North America, United States and Canada, we see that most of Western Europe and Russia are doing well. We see that Australia is doing well. And we see that Argentina down here is doing well. And Venezuela here is in a meltdown, so you shouldn't think of it's just a very sad situation. It's they've got very high inflation, and there's no goods and services on the shelf. I don't want to go off on Venezuela because it's a special situation. I just wanted to point out that it shouldn't be green in this map here. In terms of the most unequal countries, what do we see? Again, we see Sub-Sahara Africa as being in there. We see South Asia, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and what geographers would call Southwest Asia over here are very unequal. In terms of this map with the Gender Inequality Index, what we see again is very similar to the last map. We see that North America, Western Europe, Australia, New Zealand, China are doing well, but we see the countries that are not doing well, a lot of them would be in Asia, South Asia, Southwest Asia, and Sub-Sahara Africa. And as the caption mentions, one of the big reasons for this would be poor reproductive health. But here's the good news. Look at the countries in red. You can see them on the map. And the good news is that the trend is getting better. In other words, these countries are getting more equal. So this map here is dealing with empowerment, gender empowerment. And what you see is that the national legislatures is a proxy for this. And you can see the countries where it's doing well. And in the Rice to Riches assignment, you saw this this slide. And the blonde-haired lady on the right was our translator. The two ladies on her right were seamstress in a Mexico City factory. And after they had this big earthquake, the day after, the owner came and told them to go into the building and retrieve his sewing machines. And they were so upset and so mad that they created a union, and they had never before done anything like this. And what happened was the owner had to come to them, which had never before happened in their life. So what empowerment does is it gives a woman the sense that they have control over their future, that the laws don't run over them, and that they have a brighter future. So those ladies' eyes, you can't see it in this photograph, but they were sparkling because they were so proud of themselves and so happy that they'd done something that they had never done before. This is a mural from that same meeting. Diego Rivera is a big muralist in Mexico, and so here's this woman seamstress with a needle, a seamstress needle, throwing it like a javelin. So what it's supposed to portray is that there's more strength, that the woman has strength, which is part of empowerment. The next map here deals with reproductive health, and as it says, it's the maternal mortality rates. And what you see, the biggest problem areas would be in Sub-Sahara Africa, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan. And let me discuss family size in poor countries. So in poor countries, you don't have a social safety net. Kids die often, and it doesn't cost much to have a kid because you're having them out in the rice paddy. You're not going to a hospital. So a family might decide to have 6 or 7 kids because they know 2 or 3 of them are going to die, and they need somebody to help them in old age, and so they have big family sizes. Now, there is a comment. It says that economic growth is the best contraceptive. And so what that means is that if an individual family can see that things are growing and getting better, they might voluntarily decide to have 1 fewer baby or 1 fewer kid. So that's kind of a controversial statement. Not everybody would agree with it, but it makes some sense. So what do we have? When you come and look at this map dealing with adolescent fertility, what you see is that in Mexico, in various countries in South America, and then in many countries in sub-Saharan Africa, the birth rate is quite high. And here's what you get. We've already studied that back in chapter 2 with the population chapter. So what you get when you have a lot of young people having a lot of babies is you get a population pyramid that looks like this. In other words, it's very broad at the base, and it means you will have, excuse me, you'll have an increased population as time rolls on. So when we sum up, inequality is a fact of life. You can talk about inequality between one country and another. You can talk about inequality inside a country like we did with the Kurds in Turkey. And then you can also compare it inside a given labor force in terms of women, how many equal opportunities women are given. So this was key issue 2, and it fits nicely with key issue 1. The whole chapter is dealing with development. Bye.